I want to welcome everyone who's joined us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. I know we are spanning the globe a little bit, so that's wonderful. And what a nice sized group that we've got today. For those I've not met, I'm Jeff O'Keefe. I'm the executive director of Zen Peacemakers, and I wholeheartedly welcome you. We try to do this once a week with a different topic each time, a different focus area, kind of around the, if you will, the mandala of the activity areas for Zen Peacemakers. The environment clearly is one of those. So we're so pleased today to have our friend Ruth Wallen join us. Ruth is a senior teacher in the Shambhala community, lives in San Diego, but she is happily here in Boulder County with us now, and she's a Lenz Fellow at Naropa University here in Boulder. She's also core faculty in the MFA program at Goddard College. And Ruth had a background in environmental science, but has really moved over a lot to the, more the art side of expressing our care for the earth. And so today she will be talking to us about walking with trees, and I've been looking forward to this. So I'm going to mute myself, Ruth, and I'm going to hand this over to you and let you take over. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. I think that there may still be more people joining us. So we'll start with a meditation and then an offering of thanks. And we can then have short introductions and get to know each other since it's a small group. So I just ask everyone if you can find a comfortable seat. If you want to turn away from the screen for a few moments while we sit together. So as we walk towards the old oak that we meet at the beginning of this trail, let's turn to the east, the direction of the rising sun, and bow. As breath fills our lungs, it streams downward towards our feet, to the ground below, and upwards towards the crown of our heads and the sky above. As breath streams out, imagine it embracing the tree. Oh, that we could breathe life into this tree. A newly fallen branch, the leaves still green, lie at my feet. Dear oak, what must you continue to endure? I am so grateful for your tenacity, that you are still standing, that I can greet you on my walks. We circle to the south and look up at the patterns of the branches just above. The whirls of twigs and leaves make magnificent patterns into the sky. We bow again. O tree, your beauty is stunning. Moving to the west, the side of the tree where the leaves are most abundant, the smell of profuse greenery fills the air. The gentle scallops of the ovular leaves of this coast live oak end in sharp points. However, from a distance, it is as if they envelop the tree in soft lace. O oak that combines such toughness and grace, I bow to you. Passing the concrete steps on the ground, all that remains of an old dwelling, let's turn to the north. Oh, dear tree, The settler that once lived here is long gone. We bow to your strength as you continue to endure not only the cattle that trample the ground as they feast on the grass at your feet, but the gold-spotted oak borers that are feasting on your inner bark. Let's also give thanks to the Kumeyaay as we walk on their ancestral, unceded lands. Thank you. So thanks everyone for coming today. I realize that actually now that I've started the slides, it's a little bit more difficult to do introductions. So maybe after this presentation, we can all share where we're from in the chat. It's so wonderful to be with all of you today. I've been walking with trees for over a decade. I started walking in San Diego in the aftermath of drought, bark beetles, introduced borers, and 2 huge conflagrations. I started gradually without a plan. I just wanted to bear witness and be fully present to the ecological changes that were occurring. It was without any particular hope that I returned to the same places year after year, simply to be present. The trees called to me to look, to listen, to walk among them, to pay attention, to be attentive to feeling, and to learn to relate with grief. I was really fortunate when I first came to Boulder this winter to meet with Sam Randall, you have another name, Soka, I think. And she told me about the peacemaker process and bearing witness. And I was like, oh, this is what I've been doing all along. I'm still just beginning to learn about the process and hope to continue to learning more. But I felt so much resonance with the 3 tenets of the peacemakers, starting with uncertainty, with unknowing, bearing witness, opening heart. And from that deep listening, taking action. I also always start before that. I think we have to start with just feeling the full luminosity and presence of being in the natural world and offering thanks. As Craig noticed, I titled this talk actually Walking with Oaks and not Walking with Trees. And that's because I decided to take you to one specific place, Pine Valley Creek, for all of this talk. Pine Valley Creek is about 40 minutes from my home in San Diego near the coast. And it's home to one of the most resplendent groves of oaks in San Diego, because there's a creek that flows near year-round, and it's a creek that is a natural creek, not aided by irrigation water, as many creeks are in San Diego these days. And as you can see, when I first visited these oaks in 2010, this is images from 2011, they were already dying from gold-spotted oak borer, which is an introduced beetle. And as I walked with these groves, I walked initially with heartbreak and wanting to learn to relate with grief, and also wondering why no one seemed to be talking about it or being upset. I've returned over the years, and just as the pandemic started and the stay-at-home order was being issued, there was a short period where you could still go visit parks. And I felt like I needed to go to this grove. And throughout the pandemic, I visited them once every season, realizing that they had so much to teach, because the origin stories of COVID-19 and the oak borers killing these oaks were so similar. As you can see here, I started by sharing my experience as photo montages. I love the montage process because suspicious of the sublime aesthetic, I like the sense of showing a series of glimpses. I feel like this incomplete view is an expression of love, of honoring the wonder of beauty in these living and dying beings. And gradually, I also started writing about my experience. And particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote an article about the pandemic was just not, we were just not facing it as humans, but how it was, oaks were facing it. So for this presentation, what I'd like to do is share a series of excerpts from my walks. And I'll also share some of the images. I don't always have enough images for everything I'm talking about, but they'll create a mood. And I'll read 6 short excerpts, and between each one, we'll have a period of silence where you can just sink into the experience. And I hope that this gives a sense of increasing intimacy and increasingly going in deeper to the sense of place. So are there any questions or remarks before we get started? Anybody? No? Okay. March 20th, 2020. Everything was lush, emerald green. The grass glistened when the sun hit the lingering droplets of water. Among the mushrooms and flowers beginning to bud, the carcasses of the tall trees littered the ground. I walked among a sea of fallen giants. The origin stories of COVID pandemic and the GSOB killing these oaks are similar. While climate change is a contributing factor, the primary cause of the demise of these oaks is a beetle introduced because of human commerce. COVID-19 spread from animals to humans because humans destroyed the homes of these animals and or indulged in trading or consuming them. The gold-spotted oak borer is native to Arizona. Scientists assume it was introduced into Southern California and San Diego on firewood. In their natural habitat, the beetles were kept in check by predators or other unknown factors that didn't accompany them to California. And this story is echoed by that of Southern oak death, which has caused widespread devastation to the coastal live oaks, as well as the tan oaks in Northern California and Oregon. In this case, it's not a beetle, but a water mold, a microscopic fungus-like pathogen that arrived on imported nursery plants. It was first noted in both Europe and the US in the mid-1990s. The wanton introduction of exotic species into the US for pets, for horticulture, or as inadvertent hitchhikers on humans, products for human consumption, or ballast water discharge has caused widespread ecological destruction. Not only do humans move things around, but humanity is moved everywhere. Despite cautions not to move firewood, a recent study correlates the outbreaks of GSOBs as it slowly spreads northward to areas where there are clusters of rural homes, homes often heated by firewood. Despite repeated plans to preserve the rural character of the backcountry, the suburban tentacles of San Diego keep expanding out from the urban core, as has been true in so many cities. San Diego is now one of 3 of the 10 largest cities in the US that is more suburban than urban. As I write, the virus, unleashed because of human disrespect for the needs of species other than our own, has stopped life as it was, chased those of us not in the front lines to our rooms to ponder appropriate behavior. On one hand, we are asked to maintain our distance, to be hyper aware of the impact of our movements on the lives of other humans. On the other, the virus reminds us of our interconnectivity, of the potential impact of individual actions on the lives of others. How can we expand and deepen this awareness so that it applies to human relationships with all living beings. When we expand our questions, what questions, or awareness, what questions are brought to the fore? May 9th, 2020. When I arrived at Pine Valley, I couldn't believe my eyes. The trees were covered with clumps of tiny flowers, long catkins, 2, maybe 3 inches in length, each packed with tiny flowers, revealing a cluster of stamens hung from all of the leafy branches of the living trees. At the tips of the tiny stems, atop the cluster of pendulous catkins, were whorls of tiny crimson leaves. It was as if the tree had been decorated with a bunch of yellow streamers hanging from red bows. I had seen trees blooming in previous years, but never anything like this. The profusion of flowers, the utter abundance of blooms gracing every living tree was astounding. Opening the heart to grief is also an opening to love, to caring deeply about the object of loss. As I walked, marveling at the sight of these few living oaks, tears came to my eyes. But they were tears of being deeply moved, tears of joy. It was as if these oaks were giving an incredible gift, as if the world was saying, look what's possible, look in wonder, allow yourself the pleasure of wonder. Having spent the last 2 months indoors, contemplating all of the dying trees, I wondered what to make of this Baroque profusion. Maybe these blooms were a reminder of the life force that can burst forth when humans withdraw. Certainly the air was cleaner over the last few months, as many stayed at home. Maybe this was some kind of last hurrah, the trees putting all of their available energy into reproductive efforts. Maybe everything seemed more vivid, more fantastic, because I'd spent the last 2 months largely indoors. Or maybe I simply hadn't looked so carefully before. I hadn't noticed all the scrub oaks flowering on my daily walks until after this trip to Pine Valley Creek. Maybe I simply hadn't looked so carefully before. As I contemplated the profusion of spring, it's as if the whole world has cracked open. How many times did the cry come, no more, and then there was another senseless shooting, another senseless act of violence. After this long time of being locked away, after the repeated blatant disregard for human life, the cry was loud and clear. There were marches to the center of the city. I joined with families of toddlers in wagons to gather at the local elementary school. Black lives matter. Silence is violence. Look, listen, feel. Don't look away. Don't think it's someone else's life, someone else's community, someone else's suffering. There are no excuses. These killings are not mistakes, but the result of centuries of white supremacy. The world is bursting open. Recall the words of Buddhist teacher Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. Speaking of love, she writes that the entirety of our descended culture suffers from a severely atrophied relationship to the most animating, enlivening, equalizing force gifted to the human experience. How else, she asks, could those with skin privilege live in proximity or participate in slavery, lynchings, Jim Crow entitlements, massive incarcerations, and more? Let's thank these oaks, these trees of life. Now is a time to look, to listen, to pay attention, a time for a crazy, passionate love bursting forth from this time of pause. The flowering trees and the fires illuminating the streets are demanding a deep look at the legacy of colonialism and imperialism that are at the roots of the racial injustice, the global climate fever, and the pandemics plaguing trees and humans alike. Let's thank these oaks, these trees, of life. May our hearts crack open in love as we are showered by their flowers. October 16th, 2020. Was a hot day, too hot to be out hiking, but I cleared my calendar, so off I went, walking past the logs littering the ground. But where were the acorns? Finally, after a mile of walking, I came to a cluster of still living trees that had been covered with flowers on my last excursion in May. No acorns. I kept walking, finally stopping in some welcoming shade for a drink. Then I saw it, a green acorn in the foliage right in front of me. It was maybe an inch, perhaps an inch and a half long, slender, coming to a point, just a shade greener than the leaves that surrounded it. I looked around me and found another, then another, but that was it. I moved to another tree, found a low-hanging branch, stared until my eyes came into focus, and an acorn came into view. Finally, I found a branch with a whole clump of acorns. But after a long time of searching, the acorns were still very hard to find. So many questions come to mind. Despite the profusion of flowers, was this a year of small yield? Did I come too late? Did the cows eat the acorns? Will the abundance of cow pies serve as fertilizer or so desecrate the ground that nothing will grow, including the small seedlings coming up where all of the oaks have died? After years of visiting, there is so much to learn. June 2nd, 2021. Spring had finally come to the oaks at Pine Valley. During a visit 2 weeks earlier, unlike a year ago, I saw only a very few buds and left wondering if the oaks would bloom at all. But now in June, I was overjoyed to see that some of the living oaks were covered in pale pink and yellow. So here we are, back at the tree at the beginning of my walk. The upper limbs of this first tree were more barren than ever. Clumps of leaves still clinging to the upper branches had all dried to a pale tan. But lower down the tree, where the leaves were full and green, each branch was tipped with dried yellow catkins and tiny pinkish leaves that were already beginning to droop in the hot sun. I made a brief offering, bowed in each of the 4 directions, and easily made my way across the worryingly shallow creek, past the willows, and up the trail along the opposite bank. A huge triangular head rose up from a copper-colored coil. Do not pass. I quickly turned and ran back down the path, but the snake kept rattling for some time, encouraging my continued retreat. Quite some distance away, I stopped, pondering what to do. At this point in the trail, the cliff was very steep and covered in dense brush and poison oak. Forging an alternate path was out of the question. If I went back to the beginning, recrossed the creek, and took the dirt road along the opposite cliff, reaching the meadow would involve climbing over rocks and the possibility of more snakes. Finally, I found a bit of shade under a small living oak, sat down and began to breathe, looking out at a tall, bleached snag. All that was left of this oak tree was a single trunk that forked in 2 branches. Mixing my fear with breath, inhaled. Feel the energy of the earth below. Exhale. Share my breath with all living beings. A chipmunk peered over a rock, still for some time, listening, feeling. In contrast, my mind was still so buffeted by fear that it was hard for me to be fully present. When could I continue my journey? Had I waited for long enough for the snake to slither away? Be still with the patience of a chipmunk. Breathe with the trees. Gradually, I sunk into meditation. Who was I to think that I could just barrel down the trail without offering thanks, without preparing myself fully to enter? The barren trunk in front of me glistened in the hot sun. Slowly, my breath turned into song as I began a chant of rousing compassion. Sing with the dying oaks. The leaves along the top branches of a neighboring oak were also beginning to thin. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Invasive grasses, cattle, guns, firewood infected with oak borers. What are the gifts we have brought? Just who is this we? My grandfathers came here fleeing poverty and persecution. My father's father was the youngest of 9, his mother exhausted by the time of his birth. He came to the US shortly after his bar mitzvah. He lived until 96 or 98. No one knows for sure, whereas none of his brothers or sisters who remained in Russia survived the Great War. He changed his name to Rosen, thinking it was less Jewish, although all of his friends were Jews. They were interested in revolution and workers' rights, not giving thanks to the bread and wine or celebrating Shabbat. Religion was the opiate of the masses. My explorations into Buddhist practice baffled him. Now I am left to wonder, what is the proper way to give thanks? The rattlesnake that was once the oracle of wisdom and prophecy, that accompanied the goddess to ancient matriarchal cultures, that is regarded with reverence by indigenous peoples, refuse to let me pass. I am so sorry, but sorrow isn't enough. Still shaken, I offered praise to the rattlesnake that had stopped me in my tracks. Much later, I proceeded slowly as the trail wound up along the side of the cliff and then back down, until I could follow a side path to cross the creek, which was so low that I could easily jump across. The snake permitted me to pass. As I came to 2 oak skeletons, remnants of 2 trees, the larger demanded my attention, asking me to stand with her. The base of the trunk was massive, covered with bits of bark and series of small, sharp knobs. The wood was bleached gray and streaked with brown. Maybe 10 feet up, the trunk forked into 2, and these branches each in turn forked again. The branches were all stubs, broken off well before the end, the ground below littered with the fallen pieces. This huge oak still had so much presence, many years after death. What stories had died with this tree? Stories of hundreds of years of spring flowerings and winter snows, stories of years when the people rejoiced in huge acorn harvests or endured when the harvest was scant, stories not only of black bears, but grizzlies that at one time gorged on the acorns into well. How did this oak feel the gradual warming of weathers, the winters with less snow, less rain, the summers hotter, until the black beetles spotted with gold legs, eggs, hatching into larvae that bored into her deep under her heart, her bark. Imagine hundreds, thousands of these beings pulsating inside her as she was unable to make enough sap to push the intruders out, the seething mass blocking the water of flow and nutrients up and down her trunk. It's always the leaves at the top of the tree that die first. Bowing, then cautiously following the path, I made my way up to the charnel ground. I sat and began to sing, a chant of compassion and opening of heart. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Swaha. Surrounding me were the trunks of at least 7 trees. Behind me, one tree had crashed into the gooseberries. The soil from the ground where it stood embedded in the base of the tree, bits of roots ringing the edge like daggers, piercing the sky. Directly in front, the upper branches of the closest log were splayed open like 2 taunt legs, reaching upwards from a massive trunk, arced in agony. Further away were several huge logs, the trunks of trees wrenched from the hillside. Human carelessness killed these trees. I remember when they were all standing. Reduced to skeletons, yes. But when I first came a decade ago, they were all standing. Now, look at their bones heaped in the grass, trunks, branches, and limbs. Look at the 2 oaks on the opposite hillside, their upper limbs almost naked. Many of the beetles have flown further north, spreading the scourge, but some are still here, eating away. Look at these dying trees here in the wilderness, in this place of wetter in refuge. Even here, the trees are dying. The roar of a helicopter overhead interrupts my chanting. Gray eagle in the sky, can you see that the trees are dying? The humans that brought the pestilence are not the ones that you are chasing. High in the sky, can you see that they are running from the same heat that is killing the trees? Can you see that the trees are dying? High in the sky, look around you, look at the path of the devastation that follows the meanders of the creek. Look at the mountains just to the north with more barren trunks than living trees, 18 years after the huge conflagration of 2003. Can you see long enough to stop the chase? Dearest oaks, the trees that sustain people for millennia are dying. We'll now come to January 2022. Bowing again, I turn north and walk to the charnel ground, passing rows of scattered corpses. Almost 2 years ago, at the start of the pandemic, as you've seen, the brown logs felt so solid, flush with moisture, sprouting mushrooms, lichen, and even blades of grass. Now they seem dried, sunken, tattered, lower to the ground. Leaving the path, I found a place to sit in the middle of the field on a flattish rock with a lower step for my feet. I felt so naked in the middle of the field, sitting among the sea of skeletons, tossed among red, prickly spines of gooseberry. I began to practice. Until the suffering of the 3 worlds is completely exhausted, I will courageously dedicate myself to the welfare of others. 2 years ago, could we have imagined that even after a vaccine was developed, holiday parties would be planned and canceled, replaced with max vaccination restrictions, calls for everyone getting a booster, worries that hospitals would again be at the breaking point, and that many would die alone, isolated from their loved ones? And now I want to add, as we gather here today in May, the unraveling, the sense of vulnerability and uncertainty has only increased. The pandemic drags on. Second boosters are now being offered to some as yet another variant is raging. But all of this is eclipsed by the new horror that few had imagined in January, a war of untold violence, looting and destruction, bodies left in the streets unburied. The smaller trees still living by the banks of the creek or on the slopes on the opposite side of the meadow know about collapse. The remains of their elders who had lived for several hundred years lie tossed about on the ground, the aftermath of the oak borer's feast. Human elders are the most vulnerable to COVID because their immune systems are weaker. However, the gold-spotted oak borers are attracted to elders because they offer the richest bounty. Suzanne Simard has written so eloquently about the importance of mother trees, elders that nurture the next generation, passing nutrients and information, including warnings of pests, to their young through their roots. What were these elders able to pass before they perished? Even after death, trees keep giving. I have returned to sit with them for years, as dropping leaves reveal a naked body, as twigs and then large branches break and fall, gradually reducing a tree to more elemental form. Through all of these stages, the tree is still a vital presence in the community. Some foresters say that trees give even more after their death. The acorn woodpeckers who deposit acorns in the massive trunks are only one of the many birds, small mammals, and insects that depend upon the snags or fallen logs for food and shelter. Fallen logs hold more moisture than their surroundings. Witnessing the slow disintegration of these trees has been both heartbreaking and heart-opening. This time of unraveling, this time when systems are on the verge of collapse, calls to attentiveness to decomposition as a vital part of the life cycle. Forest managers may call for the cutting of dead trees to salvage some value from their timber before they seed large wildfires. But is this a blindness bred in a culture that only sees value in extraction, that wishes to avoid sitting with death? Certainly, the trees are suffering from the suppression of indigenous cultures and the controlled burns that they used to protect the forest from conflagrations. But instead of ignoring the fact that so many trees are dying, what might we learn from this process of decomposition? In this time of winter, the continued presence of the pandemic demands that there is more work to be done, that we look deeper, that we pay attention to the process of death, decay, and renewal. Decomposition is a kind of distillation. As complex organisms return to their elemental state, some forms of life will continue. What aspects of human behavior, of love, compassion, and empathy can serve to work with the darkness of collapsing systems? March 12th, 2022. So I'll bow to the old oak next to the parking lot from each of the four directions, making praise and offerings. Oaks are said to grow for 300 years, thrive for 300 years, and then die for 300 years. Perhaps this oak tree is not infected by gold-spotted oak borer, but just very slowly dying. I look closely at the tree's bark, mottled with white and yellow lichen and occasional flecks of pink. This is a very old tree, a mother tree with the widest trunk of any tree still standing in this grove. There are many small holes in her bark. Some seem D-shaped, the telltale sign of gold-spotted oak borers. I always find it hard to tell for sure. Walking onward, the creek seems as low as I've ever seen it, very worrisome for March, the middle of the California rainy season. After walking along the ridge, I cross the creek again and come to the two once massive trees that I've come to think of as guard trees. Without comparing photographs, they look much the same. The pile of limbs scattered at their feet is as I remember. I bow, offer praise, and proceed up to the charnel ground. I find myself continually affirming my allegiance to time, comparing the scene to what I remember, feeling a bit of impatience that nothing has changed. It's as if I'm steeling myself for the next disaster instead of feeling into the present moment. I stop and breathe. The slowness of death is excruciating unless one relaxes into tree time. Death is only part of the story. The dry, increasingly lifeless, barren logs lie among the green grass. Pink and yellow bring the first signs of spring. There is no single label. The narrative is not lineal. All stages of life and death intermingle. Come, let's sit together. The sun is out, the air is cool, with broad-brimmed hats. We can sit in the center of the field. Let's sit and breathe together. Let's sit and feel our sad, tender hearts. Feel the brilliant life force energy as we breathe together with the trees and bushes on the hillsides. Along the western perimeter of the field, there are several trees with thinning crowns. All the literature about Jisab is emphatic that once the trees are infested, they will die within 7 years. But haven't these trees looked much the same for some time? Are these oaks perhaps beating the odds? In some way, it's a relief to let go of any possibility of survival, to give in to the inevitability of death. But staying present, staying with uncertainty, means continuing to care, continuing to love. Breathe out with the trees. Young trees grow rapidly, but if oaks can live for many hundreds of years, although their trunks will imperceptibly thicken each year, a mature tree might look practically the same for an entire human lifetime. Trees change with the seasons, blooming and bearing acorns, but that variation is cyclical, not lineal. The abundance of acorns may vary from year to year, but the overall form of the tree would remain much the same. Oh, how much recent generations of humans have accelerated change. Can we pledge to bear witness, to visit, to be with the oaks, to care for them, as long as they're alive, and even after? Palliative care, my friend and Dharma teacher, Susan Chapman, calls it. Palliative care is meant to provide comfort and optimize quality of life. For trees who remain present long after death, might palliative care extend beyond death? The trees at our feet are slowly returning to the soil, providing nutrients for the next generation. Might we understand palliative care in the broadest sense as extending to the earth into which these trees are slowly sinking? Paul Harkin writes that we could reclaim the world within a generation through regenerative practices. Indeed, regenerative agricultural practices, enriching the soil with compost, mulch, and a variety of ground cover crops, refraining from poisoning the earth and waterways with pesticides and fertilizers, or rupturing the soil fabric with periodic tilling, will restore soil health and store soil carbon, actions that are essential to the well-being of the planet. Instead of endless cycles of hope and fear, attentiveness to the process of decomposition, to the health of the soil, points to active hope, as Johanna Macy calls it, to a vision of future health. It will take concerted action for the next generation of oaks to thrive. It will take radical changes to the ways we live. Loving the oaks demands this commitment. Let's join together in gratitude, in opening our hearts to the oaks, and pledging to listen to the fullness of the wisdom we receive. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Wonderful, wonderful. And we still have a nice group of people, and we have some time here for comments or questions, impressions, reactions, sharing, as you will. And I want to leave the time for all of you, but Ruth, I do want to tell you, for a number of years, I lived on Wildwood Glen Lane at Descanso, just right near. So it's so evocative to hear you describe and talk about this land that I lived on for a few years and really, really loved. So let's open up for, like I say, comments, questions, or anything anybody would like to share. We have a bit of time.
I'll also say, while people are thinking, that Jeff, where you lived in Descanso was the first place that the oak borers came in California in 2008.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
And where I was walking was just a few miles from there.
Yeah, yeah. I think if folks are not familiar so much with San Diego County, it might be a surprise to know that you can go from the beach to, and Ruth, my memory fails me a little bit, but up in the lagunas, what were nearly 4,000 feet?
6,000.
6,000 feet up.
Where I'm walking is 4,000.
Yeah, yeah. So and as Ruth said in the beginning, this is within 40 minutes of urban San Diego, and then if you keep going east, you drop down into this huge, beautiful desert. So it's really striking, wild landscape. Sokyo, thank you.
Sokyo.
Prime the conversation here a little bit.
Yeah, and Ruth, I'll answer to both, either Sam or Sokyo. So some people know me as one and some know me as the other. I'm really feeling a lot from that presentation. It was incredibly intimate and such a testimony to how both visual art and written word can bring us into the experience. I especially appreciate the montage form of the photographs, which have this quality of time and space and ways of relating in different scales of the experience, which I think is part of what created that intimacy for me. And your words, there were two phrases that just touched me at the core. And one was when you said, I won't get it correct, the actual quote, but it was also how you said it, that the leaves that are at the very tip of the branches are the ones that are the first to die. Some version of that. And that really struck me, connecting into those most vulnerable. And then when you repeated, can you see, can you see, can you see? That really resonated for me too. I don't know if I have a question so much of just to share some of what was touching me. And you and I've had another conversation about this, but at the end, when you were speaking to the charnel grounds, and, if this had been a presentation of the life and corpses of human beings, and the resonance, of course, would be so clear. And part of what you're doing is, can we see these beings as our bodies too? right? And so I really appreciated the use of the word charnel ground to see these beings in the same, with the same level of grief and love that we do our own bodies. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Sokyo. Thank you.
Hi. I actually have a question about, I live in San Diego, and a couple years ago, I went on a hike up on Sunrise Highway, and there was a lot of very, very large trees that were dying. And honestly, I do not remember if they were oaks, but I do remember being just filled with grief and just amazement that this trail that I know a lot of people walked on and saw these trees, and there was just nothing to explain what was happening. And I was so surprised by that. I think at that point, I didn't come back and do research. I would probably do it now. But I was just curious about awareness, like in that area that you're talking about, the Pine Valley Creek. Is there something that tells or has told people over the years that live around there what's happening, or are they just walking through unaware of why everything's dying?
There isn't anything. And at one point I proposed something actually in another place in William Hisey State Park, and it got somewhere and then didn't get somewhere. And it's hard in Pine Valley because of the Forest Service. I've actually wanted to wrap white cloth around some of the oaks and embroider a little bit, which would take a while, what's happening, and also allow people to write. But I have never had the whatever to get permission to do that. I've thought of doing it also as a guerrilla activity. And it's wonderful to see you and meet you.
Yes, I agree.
Correspondence. But to just share what you said, there's two kinds of oaks, which was explained in one of the texts that I showed briefly, white oaks and red oaks. And I forget which one, but one of them is susceptible to the oak borers. And so the oaks that you saw up on Sunrise Highway, which is higher, those were black oaks, which are deciduous oaks, unlike the coast live oaks, but they're also affected by the gold-spotted oak borer.
Oh, okay.
And up at that high, some of the conifers, the Jeffrey pines, are also affected by bark beetles. So you could have been seeing that.
Yeah. Too. They were huge trees, just huge, beautiful old trees. Yeah, very sad. Mm-hmm. Thank you for today. It was beautiful. It's great to see your work.
Thank you. And Sokyo, I did want to say that in the longer, like the written version of this, I actually do start talking about what it's like to sit with people after death. And then the fact that with the trees, we're really sitting with them for years because there's no burial. And actually, they're still performing a function in the forest.
Thank you, Elise, for the question.
Yeah, thanks.
Yoshin, hi.
Thank you, Ruth, for that exquisite, beautiful, really moving presentation. I was really especially struck by the part you were talking about your ancestors coming to the state, and then who is just this we anyway, and that really is like, struck my heart. And I thought, wow, that is a great koan, we have this koan practice of asking questions. That is a great koan question. And I was thinking how much suffering we generated by dichotomizing this world between, us and them as an environment too that we need to conquer, we need to make use of to our advantage. And then I was thinking too, when you were talking about oak trees living for 300 years and then dying for 300 years. And we also, I thought we also make death as them and life as us. So the enhanced dichotomizing life and death, which is just part of continuum, like you were talking about. And so sitting with dying trees, which is, they're really preparing to live again, right? So on the one hand, we feel so sad that they're dying and that they're dead. But I wonder if, you know, as we sit with the dead trees or dying trees, that we can kind of hope for life again. And how can we be more actively be part of that recreation process? Which is you're doing with what your work is really, but just wanted to pose that question.
Thank you, Myoshin. Ruth, do you want to comment or no? Okay, that's okay.
Just, I want to say thank you. They're great. Thank you. Thank you.
I thought I saw someone else had their hand up. Carolyn, hi, thank you.
Hello, I'm in Maryland. Yeah, just sort of random thoughts. Just read the book, The Overstory. Have you read that? Read that with a group. And so that was on my mind as you were reading. And I don't know how many other people have had a chance to read that. It's about 500 pages long, but very much about trees and the human impact that we're having. And Yoshin, as you were talking, I was thinking too that, you know, part of our sadness, you know, I think too about, yeah, it's life and death, a natural cycle, but our responsibility for the death of these living beings gives us pause for thought, and what we can do about that, we're all sort of pondering. But and my last comment was just, I was wondering are you publishing any of what you just wrote or putting it out as a podcast or something, or I don't know. Yeah.
I'm working on that. At this point, the only piece that's been published is the first piece in March was published in Tikkun magazine. And the long piece about the helicopter and the snakes, I've submitted somewhere and haven't heard back yet. My plan is eventually to work on a book with all of this. And I can put in the chat, I will be doing a different presentation as part of my Lens Fellowship at Naropa tomorrow with totally different readings. So that's my hope. And if you have any suggestions, I'm always open to it, because publishing is rather new, you know, for me, as opposed to showing artwork.
I don't know if it's something that would work, but you know, there's the site Daily Good that posts reprints of things, and sometimes videos and sometimes audio. And so I think your reading was very powerful. Like you say that, you know, can you see? I mean, that I think if there's some way that you could post both the visual and the reading together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Our website has the journal page too, so you can please make use of it.
There are actually two other things that I'm working on publishing. I also have presented this in several conferences, and I mean, I almost see this as performative lecture. So that's the other thing that I'll continue to do. But thank you for that question.
Judy, hi, I see your hand there.
Hi, Ruth. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for hosting this beautiful talk. It was such a fabulous way to wake up, which is basically what I've been doing. And it was just really, beautiful morning meditation. So, and the images are fabulous, and they just really illustrate your, what you're talking about. And yeah, thank you so much. And maybe Boom California is another online option for you for your California work if you're interested. I don't know, but thank you all.
Thank you. Kathleen?
There we go. Yes. Hi.
Hi. Hello. Yeah, Ruth, thank you so much. It's so good that that I had a deeper insight now into what you were talking about in our Ecosapra Council where we first met a couple of weeks ago. So it was really a meditative experience now to bear witness to your bearing witness and how it took shape and took form and how you express it. So this is really beautiful. Thank you so much for that and for doing it. And yeah, and it was, of course, I was also touched by this, by the resonance between what you've been doing anyway for years, and then sooner or later you'll meet the Zen peacemakers, because bearing witness and bearing witness are magnetic in a way, so they call for each other and they want to join. And this is really beautiful for me, and there's a lot of kin spirit or kin feeling for me in what I saw and when I listened to you, what I heard and saw in what you do. So bowing to trees, thanking trees, mostly every day, is it feels somewhat strange because if people watch you, it's funny, it's strange, because I live in an urban area and I'm not too much alone with trees apart from the early morning. But still, I love to go to town, actually to the town center and look for trees and talk to them or bow to them or sit with them. This is bearing witness wherever possible. And when you just talk, when I heard also the palliative care and the kind of transfer of the practice you do also with from or to human corpses or human dying people. I remember that I had the imagination when I saw your picture from 2022 with the really kind of dead pieces of the tree on the ground. I also had it reminded me of elephant graveyards as well, with this gray atmosphere and color. So it's really mingling. All these life forms are dying and composting themselves to life. Maybe we can say that. So giving themselves into to other living beings, so to say. And this is just, it's beautiful. And I also I really appreciate the combination of your scientific depth, the information you also give, and the artistic expression then. So I remember also that saying of one American actor, female actress, saying, "Take your broken heart and make it into art." So this feeling of grief, and I share that really with you, is that I also didn't know where to go with it, and while sitting and bearing witness to that, the sadness, the loss, the grief, and the bridge of tenderness actually led me to love, to really, to recognize that that grief is love, or coming from there, from that deep connection to the living, the vivid, the living forces and energies. And so, yeah, art is an expression for me too. Haiku, writing, and reciting lists of threatened and dying species. So this is also a beautiful practice combined with walking meditation. So yeah, there's a lot coming to life while I'm sitting here with you. And my question is, I understood that you work at Naropa, and I wonder if how you work with students, or do you also go with students to that valley or to the creek, or do you basically do it alone? Thank you.
Well, I'm at Naropa only for a semester on a fellowship that's really a research fellowship. So, but I and mostly where I teach at Goddard College, it's distance learning. So it's very intimate, but I'm not in the same space with students. I have shared readings of this work with Goddard students, and I really thank them, particularly the piece about in the springtime with the flowers. I first shared there, and I think it was their reaction was very moving and helpful. And I also felt that the snake, last year was really saying, be mindful of how you bring people into sacred space. Take the time to make sure that you really understand this before you bring people. So there were a couple people from San Diego on the call. I don't think they're here anymore, but 2 people were here from the local Sangha. I think I will, but it needs to be done with mindfulness. Emily is on the call. She and I have walked together with the trees after fire in Colorado. Thank you, Emily. And I think I will be taking other people there as well. So I think, it has to be done mindfully, but it is, I hope that I'm also taking people there through Zoom, but there's a different experience when you're actually in the space. And yeah, I think that it's important to do that. So thank you for asking.
We have a few more minutes if someone has another question, or it doesn't even have to be a question. It could be an observation or an impression. Sherry, I see your hand. Thank you.
Sherry, you just muted yourself.
There you go.
Okay. It's delightful to see you relating to how you've been bringing the life of the oak trees in California, where I spent a decade. So I really resonate with that, and how you're bringing that wisdom and sensitivity into what's happening in Colorado. So I just really, and I feel just my heart has been opened up because trees, I think, are one of those metaphors. If a tree didn't exist, would have to create it, because it's such a metaphor for life. And it's just, we have so much to learn if we would just listen. And I feel like that really comes across in the way that you present that. So we're very gifted to have Ruth with us for a little while longer for the semester. And I hope that you might join us for her presentation on Wednesday. I think we can send her that link. But there's something about just the resilience and joy in grieving that really comes across in your work, and the bearing the witness. It's so necessary. And I feel like that really comes across in your presentation of there is action involved. We don't just receive what you're saying. So I greatly appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Wonderful, wonderful. And Sherry, are you here in Boulder County?
Yep, I'm right here in Niwot.
Oh, okay.
and I teach in Europa. I'm the appointer. I'm the faculty lead for the Joanna Macy Center, but I also I got COVID, so I've been limited. I'm fine now, but I was limited in not being able to do some of the excursions that Ruth did with Emily. But my heart has been there, but my body has not made it.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, perhaps we have time for another comment or question, if anyone would like to share.
This is Ken.
Hi, Ken. Let's see, where are you? There you are.
Hey.
Hi, Ken.
I'm in middle New Mexico, not north, but not south. And we're burning right now. There's already fires all over the place. And so this brings me to an awareness. This presentation helps me see and think about the plight of the fires in our state, and they're going to continue. And thanks for sharing so much of that with us. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken. And we've got New Mexico in our hearts, and watching the news, watching the fires. Thank you. Well, yeah, I've got a question that's really more on kind of the science side a little bit, Ruth. Having been a longtime Southern Californian and been in the oak forests all the way up through Santa Barbara, is this phenomenon occurring all up and down that far, up behind LA and up into Ventura County and Santa Barbara County? Or do you know?
Yes. So it's that's the fear. This particular oak borer is moving slowly, but it was first in San Diego County. It's now been found in Riverside County. I could send you the link. I don't have it in my head. It has been found in some places. I think also it's kind of getting to San Bernardino, LA County. I think the fringes, definitely a lot in Riverside County and further north in San Diego, and also closer to the coast in San Diego. So it's slowly making its way. The prediction is that it will. Fortunately, it doesn't kill every tree, but it tends to kill the oldest trees.
Yeah.
And at the same time, sudden oak death is doing a number in Northern California. And that's predicted to slowly move south. So it's all worrisome.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I also just wanted to say, before we close, thank you to everyone. I've done a number of short readings of this work, but never more than 15 or 20 minutes. So I was a little worried about not wanting to go too long, but yet wanting to give the arc of the experience instead of what I've usually done in the past, which is just one piece. So thank you for being here and allowing that opportunity.
Wonderful, Ruth. And somebody just chatted that it worked well, and I would agree, especially with you broke up each of the sections very nicely and gave us all a chance to settle in and really hold what you had said and let it kind of echo a bit. So that was wonderful, very effective. And the event tomorrow, if others can join, perhaps there's a way we can share how to do that virtually, I gather?
I've already put it in the chat with the Zoom link.
Okay, good.
And Sherry, somebody just put it in again.
Okay, good.
So, and Sherry, do you want to say anything about that? Or you're also welcome to come, those of you that are in Boulder, in person, to the Performing Arts Center at Naropa.
Yeah, if you can join us in person, those that are in the area, you're more than welcome. And it's always wonderful because we're getting used to being with other people again. And so it's lovely when you can do that. And it's also wonderful that Zoom exists and you can be in Germany and listen. So we're really honored. It's a perfect a perfect blend to have Ruth with us for this whole semester. And I wish it was longer actually, because there's so much richness there. And we have these, we have them come periodically, but Ruth has been particularly resonant with what's been going on with the fires that we've had, the Marshall fires, all that's been happening. So it's been wonderful having you there. And I really would love to have you join us tomorrow. It's really wonderful to have people outside of the Naropa community to be there. It's a larger community.
I will also send out the link to all who have registered for this. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah.
So it's wonderful to see people saying from where they're from and the unceded lands from where they live. In Boulder, it's complicated. It's the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and I think many other nations as well. But those are the major three. I think also there's some Kiowa and Sioux.
Paiute.
And to answer, go ahead, Sherry.
And Apache also, but it's yeah.
To answer Kathleen's question, my research question, I basically came here with a proposal about walking with trees. And since the fellowship is connected with the Lens Foundation, how Buddhist practice can help inform environmental grief and resilience and all of the questions that come up walking with trees. And the research question, as I shared with you in council, that's come up very much while I've been here, has been how to stay present with fire, because that we've already had fires in Boulder since I've been here. And I keep looking at the weather reports for New Mexico every day and just am really concerned about what's going on in New Mexico.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Okay, we are at the end of our time. Ruth, I sincerely want to thank you. What a warm presentation. Really touched me, to be sure, and I have the feeling everyone else here. Thank you all for attending and supporting our program and supporting Ruth. And we will say goodbye and hope to see you again another time. And everyone stay safe and take care of yourselves. Thank you all.